Unheard.
Hello and welcome to Unheard episode 7. It's been a while. We took a little sabbatical while making these episodes. We wanted to get this right, and we are closing in on the end of the first season of Unheard. And there's a very important topic that we wanted to bring for the 7th episode, the pre-final episode of this season. And this topic has been very close to our hearts at Defy, very close to the meaning of defying, and that single word is choice. Choice has played a very central role in how we imagine education systems should become in the future. How they are, and we see the lack of choice as the reason for the failure of education, of the society, of childhood in general. And today we have a very, very important guest, Nihal, who has, in my opinion, exemplified the art of making choices. Nihal wears many, many hats. He runs a company called Limitless. He is also the venture lab lead for the Be Visionaries Fellowship. He designs fellowships, programs, workshops all over the world. And he's a very, very good friend. And I think at the center of his heart is this curious child who's always willing to build something, who's always willing to try something new, always attempting to learn and discover places. How many countries is it now? 86?
It's 69.
69. Okay, so Nihal is an avid traveler as well, and I think a lot of the work that he does comes from the places that he visits. And amongst our circles, he's known as the connector, the person who connects different threads, different people all over the world with each other. Okay, so clearly I really like him, obviously, and I want to open this space for us to hear a little bit more from Nihal. Nihal, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Episode 7. Nihal, I have already said what choice has meant for us. I would love to know from you what meaning does this word hold in your life?
So, ever since I started my journey when I was a teenager, choice. I was lucky enough to not be forced into a choice because I had to lead somebody else's vision of what my life could be, which unfortunately happens to a lot of children or teenagers, especially in our country, but also many other places in the world. But when you don't fully know yourself, that choice doesn't really come naturally to you. So you end up picking by deduction. So you start thinking of, okay, these are the choices most recommended. This is a choice that seems seems something with the least amount of friction. So I'll just pick that. And that's how I started my journey. And I realized that choice would take me onto a path that I would never resonate with, that I would have a lot of regrets or would carry a lot of weight in my life, wouldn't be able to design the life that I wanted. And there was nobody to blame here for it. Even though I wasn't pushed here, the issue was that sometimes when we don't know ourselves, we either end up making the wrong choice or we let somebody make the choice for us. And this is where I think my journey with choice began, and since then, how I started to take that control back.
What were some? I mean, I would love to believe that you were just born with this wisdom that you want to make choices, that you want to take control of your life, and you want to be the one who decides what happens at what points of life. I certainly realized all of this much later. How did this realization come to you? Where did this wisdom come from? What's the source of feeling so independent that yes, I can and I should make these choices?
So when I started my journey as an 18-year-old, I was destined to be an accountant. And that came from a place of safety and security for the family, and felt that I would be successful and this would be an ideal career path for me. And because, of course, they wanted the best for me, I never really questioned it, and I took this on. But with every passing week in university, I started to see myself outside of that. It was deeply impersonal to me. And I looked at people around me to think that maybe I'm the misfit. Maybe everybody here wants to be here. And when I started asking the same question to them, none of them knew. None of them really wanted to be there in the first place. I'd say in my class of, say, 65, there were probably 4 who said, I know, I understand this well enough, and I feel like I want to be here and I want to spend the next few decades doing this. And that struck a chord with me. Then I started to ask a few of my friends who had taken the engineering path, saying, why did you pick this? And it was again out of deduction. And I asked them to ask their peers, and it felt like the same thing. And the patterns just kept emerging like that. And I had 2 choices. One was to lean in, just like my peers were doing, just like some of my family members were doing, and take on that path and do the best I can in that path. But it just didn't sit well with me. I couldn't go back home and imagine doing this for 30, 40 years. And this choice number 2 was, okay, I'll pick something else. But to even do that, I didn't know. So the link that I created about why people aren't able to make choices, except in certain circumstances where there are certain parents who just force their choice on you, and you don't have that wiggle room to explore or to negotiate with them. In many cases, it is about a lack of self-discovery. It is about a lack of really knowing with conviction where you want to go. And if you have that conviction, if you have a natural affinity to build mastery there. You have a natural affinity that people could see, people who know you well could see that you would thrive there.
Yeah.
And making a case for that. And to do that, self-discovery was needed. That was a tool that is still fundamental to how I make choices, which is, I feel like all of the answers are here. Within me, all of the answers are like stars in the sky. And the more I start to investigate these, the easier it is for me to see those patterns, for me to see those constellations and make sense of the world around me. Whether it is where I live, whether it is what kind of a partner do I want, whether it is the kind of career I want to build, or the lifestyle I want to have.
I will come back later in the conversation as to why. I mean, the story in my household was I think eventually I had choices, but for a long time, I think I self-imposed a lot of the removal of choice, or not having these choices. And if I trace it back a little bit, so there'll be these subtle things that would happen at home that would, sort of reinforce that behavior. For example, a very famous thing you would always hear at home was, right now, work hard, focus, in your studies, and give your exams, and skip some of your friends' birthdays, and do all that, keep a blinder on, and then one day, when you finish university and you get a job, then the world will open like an oyster, and you can experience all of this freedom and make all of the choices that you want. And subconsciously, I think I internalized it so much that I said, okay, no doing anything else. Keep within the sort of path, and because there is this thing at the end of the tunnel that is waiting when you will have this blooming possibility. I want to discuss at some part of this conversation, why do we have environments that make us believe this way? But before that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened after university for you? What's the story? How did you end up from somebody who was feeling so lost and just about noticing that you were not the only one who was lost, and so many other people were lost because they just never had this opportunity to to discover themselves. From that to now, where I think you almost have your hands full with ambitions and aspirations and things you want to see, not only now, but way out into the future. What was this journey like? And really want to hear that story.
Yeah, so as I started to figure out that self-discovery was what I needed to understand myself, understand who I am, what makes me come alive, what are my skills, my competencies, my superpowers, the values that bind me, all of those things. And I started to just ask these questions to myself and started to write them down. And it was really difficult in the beginning, but I also took support from people who knew me to say, what do you think it is from just you observing me over the years? And as I started to pick on those clues and started to journal and write these down, I realized that the possibilities for me started to converge. So now I felt like I had a compass. And the more questions I started to figure out that gave me glimpses of the different sides of me, that compass started to become a GPS. So, and soon enough, within a few months, while I was doing this self-discovery bit, I started to sit with some of my peers, my friends, and gave them these questions to think about. And some of them changed their paths the same way, and they found those really meaningful. And I really enjoyed the process of doing that. So it became clear to me that a lot of young people around the world, in fact, a lot of grown-ups too, because they didn't have those possibilities when they were young, they have 3 questions that they struggle with, but don't have answers to them. And if our mainstream educational institutions only focused on these 3 questions, that would be it. That they wouldn't have to do anything else. Which was 1, asking who are you really and helping you figure that out. Second is, what is success to me and how do I become successful? So we tend to, again, many of these mainstream institutions, sometimes even our homes, think of success as this amount of money or this amount, these kinds of relationships or these kinds of assets to own. But maybe that's not what we need. And that's when I was starting to discover that I never really cared about wealth. For me, it was about impact. For me, it was about the depth of relationships and experiences I could have.
Yeah.
And so even defining that, and what does it take to get there? What kind of mindsets do I need to build? What kind of skill sets do I need to hone? Right? That's the second question. And the third question is, where do I start? How do I take my first steps? How do I go from 0 to 1? How do I bring an idea to life?
Yeah.
And which is why, like, so much of your work resonates with the philosophy that I've had, is because Defy and Nooks let you do all 3. And they let you do all 3 in a non-didactic way, where you get to explore that through play and discovery. And for me, when I was able to articulate these 3, this is all I wanted to do for the rest of my life. For me, it was, how do I help as many diverse people answer these 3 key questions in as many interactive ways as possible? And that journey began just during college and right after that, where all I did was start either building projects or get aligned with some other projects, so I could do more of this in unique interactive ways.
So after university, your family did not push you to get a job, or what did you go work somewhere for some time, or?
So I worked for 6 months while I was running 2 companies, while I was organizing a TEDx event specifically around these 3 questions called the feasibility of dreams. And the reason I took up this job wasn't because of family pressure or anything like that. This was a company that would help young ideas go from 0 to 1. And I still love them to bits. The amount of wisdom that I got from there about how do you conceptualize an idea and how do you breathe a brand to life, right? So I spent 6 months there trying to stitch all of these together while I was tinkering with a whole bunch of projects. And I think I did that for the rest of my life, which was start just tinkering, because there was so much joy in just creation that sometimes I did it to a fault. But that was the journey. As for my parents, I think when I look at a spectrum of families, my parents came from a side of the spectrum where they felt, firstly, I didn't even tell them about this journey that I was taking because I didn't want to scare them, and they wouldn't understand. They would say the exact same thing that your parents would say, which is finish off CA and then figure whatever you want. Right? So especially, and this is something I would also tell young people, is when you're figuring things out, when you're tinkering, when you're building a track record, when you're building a portfolio, honing your skills, don't tell them what's happening. Because once you do, for example, you want to be a photographer, build a portfolio, show that you're good. Because that will give them confidence to say, okay, he's taking a different path. It scares me, but at least he's good at it. Or at least he knows what he's doing, or at least he's thought about it enough, at least he's built a small community around it. So that reduces that risk. So that's what I did. I didn't tell them anything for the next 3 years. They still thought I would push to get a job as an accountant. And as I started to get a little popular, I started to speak at certain conferences, and I started to bring some of these accolades or share that with them. Then I would gently tell them that this is a path I'm going to be on. And for that spectrum of parents, sometimes all they need is, because so my parents, maybe even like your parents, we came from a post-independence India, right? Where like my grandfather was a farmer and another grandfather was a coolie, right? For them, all they needed to do was to break that cycle of poverty. Survival. And my parents were born at a time where they just about survived that, but it was really important that they educated themselves and created stability. This was what they knew. So this is what they tried to instill in us, which is, I know that if you become an engineer, you won't end up on the street. I know that these are 3-4 safe professions. So do that and then figure it out, right? That we have a very common quote in India which says, in India, you become an engineer and then you figure out what you want to do with your life, which was very much what happened to you.
Same.
So
totally.
I understand where that comes from. It's good intentions, but those good intentions can become didactic and can suck the soul out of somebody. In this case, they still had that, but they came from a spectrum where they would be open to me exploring something else as long as they felt like I can manage that. I can thrive there.
I think the Indian parenthood is a paradox in itself. That first of all, it starts with a very non-trust sort of environment. That I cannot. I know what's better. I cannot trust you. I have seen life, but at the same time, a parent respects their child only when they are able to trust them. But they don't make it easy for you. They don't make it like, okay, here's the path. This is how you. No, you have to actually go against some of what they're saying, build what you were building, take it back and show them, and then when they see, okay, this worked out, all right, now you can have our trust. So it's like this little game they play with you where you have to earn their trust despite the environment usually wants to keep you, untrusted.
That's the rite of passage in India. You have to earn the right to be trusted.
Yes, you have to find your way. You've been working with a very wide audience of people, entrepreneurs, young people, some cases children. What do you feel is needed? Let's say for India, maybe other countries are making choices a lot better, or in a more open way. But in India, how do you get past this this barrier to choice? as a community, as a country, or as a culture. Because for us now it is almost starts feeling like this is what being Indian means. That your parent is going to tell you, don't do a million things, you will have to rebel, and so on. Is there a different reality that is possible?
Yes and no. For example, I've looked into this quite a bit because this was the very basis in which I started, sort of the genesis of my career began. The yes is that, especially in urban India, the urban affluent India one, the parents these days are, some of them Gen X, some of them millennial parents, and then we have Gen Z parents with who have just become parents, right? They grew up in some form of abundance. So there was never a fear of like, okay, my child is going to end up on the street. They will still carry some kind of baggage and conditioning of like, hey, I have to control my kid. There is that. But there is also, for example, the millennial parents. When I talk to so many of my millennial friends, they also come from this frustration of like, my parents had to dictate a certain way, I had to lead my life. I'm never going to subject my child to that. So there's a little bit of that coming to them too. So I do see a shift, especially in urban India, or especially when families turn to abundance. Whereas when you look at India 2, India 3, when they're still living in patriarchal households, when they're still living in a joint family where there is the one person who will decide the fate of the kids' lives, that still happens. I have friends who still have that. So there, and when they're still struggling to make ends meet, the most obvious thing still is, how do I get a government job? So sit and crack those exams. But I think one way that things have shifted a little is startup culture. In fact, even like I read a really interesting article on how Shark Tank India started a conversation in Indian households and institutions about, hey, this is very much a possibility. This can, there is a way that somebody that we know can do this and thrive. So that those barriers to entry have reduced a little bit. So I think the more success stories they see in alternative paths, and I think in the where we're going in a post-AI world, we won't have a choice but to push for meaning and purpose. That there was a time where we were growing up where meaning and purpose were luxury to some, and to some it was an earned, rigorous effort. Now we'll come to a stage where, unless you are driven by something, unless something excites you so much that you want to build mastery there, you are going to be outcompeted by an AI, let alone another human.
I'll come to this competition bit in a minute. It's a very, very, very choice topic for me as well. But isn't it that we are so in opposition to the old India, let's say, or the India which is restrictive and which is trying to play it safe and which is attempting to keep a very strong sort of dependent environment, right? Are we challenging that with the sort of Western ideal of independence, right? Because there is like I see, for example, the American ideals or the Western ideals of independence are being very individualistic, right? Whereas you are free to make all the choices in the world. And there is really, nobody can expect to depend on you. You are supposed to be almost like too independent, completely independent. And it cannot be an expectation that you will take care of somebody, or you will live in a mutually sort of a community environment. And we know that Western society has struggled for quite some time now with community building. They're actually having strong codependent communities. India, one could say that that community behavior was very forced. It was there and now you almost had to be in a community out of fear. That you have to live in a joint family, you live with people around you, you respect your aunts and uncles, even though they sometimes are very toxic to your life. But somehow it managed to keep some degree of communityness, which we can see quite quickly dissipating away. So are these the only two choices? Either you can be a bounded community which thrives on fear, that we have seen already in India, or the new India that is emerging, which attempts to have this sort of American independence ideals, which is like, okay, I do whatever I wish. It cannot, what happens to people around me really doesn't matter as long as I have all the freedom to do whatever I want. Are these the only two ways of seeing choice or not having it?
It's a great question. So, because I lived half my life in a very individualistic part of the world, in the West, I see the stark difference of the two, and I appreciate I appreciate the positives in both these places. But I still have a strong leaning towards our collectivist way of being. Of course, it needs a little bit of work, and it needs to evolve in the 21st century. But I think what brought us close, I think, when we look at how collectivist societies were built, they were built around shared adversity. Right? They were built at a time where we didn't have enough resources for each of us, for us to live just by ourselves, completely independently. One of us in the neighborhood had a car. One of us in the neighborhood had a certain appliance that the rest could borrow. One of our families had both parents who had to work, so the kid was put in charge. Sorry, a neighbor would take care of the child and raise the child too. Right? That village, that hamlet that we created is really precious. It came out of necessity, but it's an integral part of our social fabric.
Yeah.
And I think we can still keep that while reducing that rigidity that we have. And that rigidity, again, like if we look at it, we need to look at it from both stakeholders and both perspectives, right? Yes. On one end, yes, we need to give children the freedom to explore. Sometimes institutionally, that's not given to them with schools and things like that. Sometimes it's also the perspectives of who your parents seek as counsel. It could be your family members. It could be it could be just other family friends that they would try to get validation. Right? Those things have to change, and those are fairly rigid. But on the other side, when we look at our parents, for instance, the concern for them is this is a reality for so many of us, right? Like I know so many of my peers whose parents had to take a loan, who had to sell a plot of land, a farmland, to get this child educated. And he wants the best ROI he could get for that child. He doesn't want this child to get distracted into cricket or into films or into whatever, is how he would think, right? Now, what would squash some of those concerns is if this child is able to show that if I lead this alternate career or alternate life, that I would be just as, if not more successful, I would be happier, and the key concerns that this person, and one of the concerns, right? Like you know this really well, and it came to me too, which is, hey, if you want a doctor or a chartered accountant, who will marry you? So all those notions are slowly shifting, but and let's say a potential spouse and their family is also realizing that we have gotten our children, or we've seen family members get married to somebody with a government job or an engineer. They weren't really. It's not like they were stellar human beings. No. They weren't, right? So those notions, those notions are breaking. Yeah. They are shattering, not at the pace that it should go to,
Yeah.
especially considering how quickly our world is changing now.
Yeah. I feel that India has a pretty interesting opportunity, that it comes from a history of communities being very strong, and sometimes very toxic, but still very strong. It's moving towards, it is realizing that toxicity now, and it's trying to create a different reality. And there is exposure. We've been exposed to Western world. There's more number of people that travel out of India, from India now, than ever was. And so we are getting exposed to the idea of independence and individual freedom. Maybe the opportunity, as much as a threat, is that maybe India, or people from India, can figure out an in between, where you don't, that finding this independence is not by getting rid of communities, that finding this independence is creating better communities, where you feel that you are not a community purely out of survival instinct or out of adversity, but you are a community because you feel great about being together, and about seeing a future in an environment where people depend on you and you depend on them. This sort of codependence by choice, as opposed to by adversity. But it's a challenging thing, because where do you experience positive communities? Like, it's very hard to find sometimes. Like my experience of relationships through my family was, we had to visit every summer vacation was visiting somebody, some relative. And so we were doing a lot to make sure that we are in touch, we are connected with people in our family. And then the moment we would leave, then all this negative talk would begin, like, oh, I wish they fed us better, or they did XYZ negative things. And so I always felt very distanced from, well, I don't want this. Like, family never became, my extended family never really became a community for me, never a positive community. And none of the positive communities that I was able to access was easily offered. So how does one access this sort of, communities that enable you to discover yourself, find this independence, find who you are, and support you through that journey? I know, for example, Akshay and the community he was building played such an important role. But what would you suggest for anybody who feels that right now they're surrounded by people who call themselves their community, but really are not allowing this person to make choices?
That's a great question. So the way I've curated my community, for instance, when I look at two sides of my family, there's one side of my family that has a massive heart. They would give all of themselves to somebody else, and they're jovial and they're light. But I can barely have an intellectual conversation with most of them. I could barely have a dialogue about the state of the world, about some of the issues that we might be facing, about the future. They don't care. And that's fine. So initially, as I was starting off my career, I felt like, but they're my family, they should understand, I should have a space to talk to them. No, there are probably two individuals there that I could actually broach a conversation like that, and they would want to still be a part of it. But what I can get there is love, and that is that unconditional love, and that lightness and that spontaneity, which I miss, right? Yeah. So then I have a couple of friends that I grew up with. We have absolutely nothing in common, and maybe their worldviews will scare the hell out of me, right? But I could be a child with them. I could, because I don't seek validation, and they don't care for the masks I wear, because so much of who I am is what I do. Yeah. But I can show up there without bringing any of that, because they don't care, right? So I have found pockets of community where I've understood this is the best that they can give me. What is the currency exchange I can have with them, right? And when I do that, I reduce a lot of the expectations that I want from them, the weight that I have to carry. So the fluidity that I've been able to build with with my family, with a few of my other family friends and my cousins and things like that, have made this journey a lot more enjoyable. Because for the other stuff, I can rely on friends. I can rely on a certain support group that I've built. Right. So it is about, okay, because there is a part of a family that we've grown up with, that they have honed something that and they will give you that which nobody else can give at that level. Just pick that and then curate it from whatever else you see. There's sometimes, because there's some of this we can easily ignore because we put so much expectation on it.
I think one of the biggest challenges for India has been belonging to the idea that we only have one community. Sometimes that is based on the family or the religion or the city you live in, and then that's it. We don't really believe in multi-subscription, that we can actually be part of many different communities, many different reasons for being a part of them. And therefore, I think sometimes you also come with a lot of insecurity. What if this community gets threatened? Or what if, my identity collapses? I cannot belong to this as much as I have been able to belong to it. I think that is definitely a very big concern as to how we can start feeling confident enough that yes, it is possible for me, and it is in fact useful for me to be a part of many different kinds of communities. And then my identity is not entirely dependent on one. Because if it is, then I might, it might be easy for me to be manipulated as well. There was something interesting that happened. So I went to, last year I attended 2 conferences on something that I don't usually get access to, which is libertarianism. So I'm usually surrounded by non-profits and education people, but I had this opportunity to participate in 2 conferences that was around the idea of liberty. And there was participation by a lot of think tanks and policymakers, politicians even, very interesting. And there was a lot of discussion around freedom. Right? Freedom, which is what we, I think, in a bigger way define the ability to make these choices, the possibility of making these choices. And I found that the definition of freedom that was quite often used was in the association with free markets, right? Or more simply, the freedom to make money the way you want to make. The freedom to make as much as you want to make. The freedom to make your economic outputs the way you want them to be. And I realized that there is one design of the world that believes that you go through education, you get a job, you build your livelihood, and then if you build it well and you build some wealth, then you have agency and freedom. You've achieved it. That's it. You've achieved economic independence. You're free. And I found that a little bit troubling. That is the definition of freedom. That it stops at economic freedom for an individual. And then I started doing some thinking, and and reading and finding, and I started thinking. So, what was the definition of freedom for India, let's say, or for Asia, several hundreds of years ago, before industrial revolution, before colonization? And I found that freedom was very much defined in the context of community, and even more than that, it was defined in the context of self, but not the economic self, but the sort of like this inner self, finding peace, finding joy, finding fulfillment. And there was somebody at the conference who said something really cool. He said, there were 2 parts of the world, like let's say India and China as regions, that really did not try to pursue economic indicators for development. They were pursuing these sort of like inner indicators of individual freedom being peace as opposed to how much wealth. And yet, these were the same regions that were among the wealthiest in the world. What do you feel about it? Do you feel that the idea of choice making, the idea of pursuing freedom to live the way you want, is entirely about whether you can become an entrepreneur, whether you can, create the income source the way you want it to be, whether you can work 9 to 5 or choose a way to work at different hours. Is it entirely about work, or what else can be the freedom? What else can somebody make choices towards?
I think, again, going back to where I started, freedom means nothing if you don't know who you are. And what, because once you start to understand, this is the kind of life that I want, this is how I define happiness, this is how I define success, and where do I want to play within that realm? Because otherwise, we will just dovetail into somebody else's definition of freedom. Because sometimes that I see that a lot in the West, where I have the freedom to make life choices, diet choices, even if it's bad for me, the freedom to say I will still do it anyway. Right? And when we look at a lot of people chasing freedom, freedom for them could be having guns. And that is it's so tied to the identity of being an American right now, which is why they are not able to repeal it, because they've linked it. I have the freedom to carry a gun, I have a freedom to fire a gun.
My freedom is absolute.
Exactly, absolute, right? So, and again, they dovetail into that because they themselves haven't asked, what does it mean for me to be free? Me. And when you don't have that, you by deduction will start to say, how do you see freedom? Let me try that. And even after trying that, they would still feel empty. So when I, for example, define freedom, I would say that can I build a life where I am not restricted by where I want to be and for how long I want to be there. Right? And if I don't have that yet, because of, let's say, because of my passport or because of a certain household situation, I will find a way to create that freedom over time that can give me that. Right? Freedom to say, to do work on my terms, and do work that pleases me rather than to pay bills. Right? So when I start to define what does freedom mean for me in terms of a relationship, freedom mean to me in terms of a lifestyle, freedom mean to me in terms of work, freedom means as a place to live, like whatever you define. And so in some cases, I might not even think of a couple of these categories because I don't mind them being a default. So it stems from there. Unfortunately, even when we look at America as the land of the free, you will see as you start to notice, they don't have a choice but to make but to rely on a broken system of healthcare. They don't have a choice but to live a certain way because they can't, because society is designed so rigidly. So that freedom has a dark side. We see even as community, right? As there's an individualistic society where I don't depend on anyone, but 22% of Americans don't have a single close friend. Right? There's a massive loneliness epidemic. And when that loneliness epidemic, it's such a harboring ground for capitalistic societies to thrive, because when you're lonely,
there's no other metrics
you can sell them shit you don't need. And when you're lonely, you're incentivized. The society incentivizes you to stay lonely because that would make you a good consumer, right? So it is for me, wherever you are, if you are able to truly define what does life mean to you, happiness mean to you, success mean to you, freedom mean to you, and what are the pathways in which I can get to this point, that's it. That's all you need to do.
There was a conversation at some point I was having, and I don't remember who, but it was somebody who asked, we were talking about freedom, and somebody asked, so what is love to you? And this is a very challenging concept if you see both of those in the same lens. So freedom is sounds so individualistic, whereas love is so dependent on other people, and other things and people around you. Of course, you can love yourself, but even then, there is two of you. So the idea of love is so naturally beyond the person, and the idea of freedom feels so naturally individualistic. And I was trying to reconcile the two, and at that point, I remember I said that love seems to be the freedom to lose some freedom. That your active choice to be willingly, like the most truest freedom would be if you can make the choice to lose some of it. That when you truly own something, how do you know that you truly own something? You only know it when you have the choice to give it away, and that is how I think I'm trying to reconcile, because both of these terms are so important to me, love and freedom, and I don't want to see them in conflict. I feel I want to see them somehow be able to work together. Okay, one last thing, and then we'll close for today. It's a lovely conversation. I've had countless moments when I've spoken about Defy and the Nook and all this freedom and agency and da 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 da. And parents would approach me and they'd be like, but we let him do whatever he wants. We are not like that. And then they ask, so what can I do to enable? How can I have a Nook-like environment in my house? Or how can I make sure that I'm enabling my child to feel that they have choices, they have freedoms, that they are growing positively and so on. So do you have something that you would want to say to parents or elder siblings and grandparents and teachers and all of these people who have some space and authority to either offer or take away freedom for a child? Is there something that you would advise them to do that maybe they haven't yet been able to offer children around them?
I'd say give them a budget. I don't mean a financial budget, a budget to explore something. And the reason there's a budget is there's a cap for you to explore and fail there, and you've not burned the house down, or you've not put somebody else into jeopardy, right? And slowly increase that budget over time. It could mean that you are going to decide what we as a household is going to do here. This is the amount of money we have, or this is the kind of resources we have. Why don't you decide? Right? And over time, when the kids get autonomy, which is, I think, very similar to just the Defy philosophy as well, which is, firstly, let's tell you how to not cut off your arm.
Incrementally.
Exactly. And little by little, and I've seen even you with the team, right? Some of you team members who've joined the organization, I've seen them grow and now take on bigger and bigger responsibilities to a point where you can just close your eyes and know that this will run smoothly, right? It's that. It is what budget can you allow, not just in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of space, for the child to take certain decisions, to have that level of autonomy, and over time expand that, and over time take a back seat and let the child run that. And in some cases, if the child needs, okay, for me to make this level of decision, I need some sort of counsel. How can I create a counsel or an ecosystem where that child can seek support from somebody or learn outside of that household? And that's it.
That's a very nice way to put it. And I feel that I have noticed that the more people, like this idea of controlling a child or controlling anybody really is such an exhausting idea. The person who is, of course, the person who's being limited in their choices is suffering, but also the person who is playing the role of the limiter of the controller is suffering equally, because they now have to carry this burden of being right, of being the one in charge. They have to, and this is the sad thing about growing up, seeing people who want to stay, absolutely in control, is that you end up learning from them, and you end up seeing that they were in control, but ultimately it did not help them build a good life. You would know that, but you'd still end up doing the same thing, because we learn a lot more from what we see than from what people tell us is the right thing to do. And I wish that more and more people would understand that controlling others and trying to limit others is a huge cost on yourself. A cost that is very hard to recover from, and very hard. So if you want your child to do well, show them that you are living a good life. You are being happy, you're feeling content, you have a community around you. And that's the best thing for a child to learn from. They see you that way, as opposed to they see you stressed about, his life. It's never worked out very well.
I totally get that, and I agree with it. There have been challenges where, especially in our parents' generation, where our parents didn't have the choice to indulge back in the day. They still carry that even if they've reached a certain level of abundance.
Yeah.
My parents have reached a certain level of wealth, but they don't know how to indulge even now.
Yeah.
And when you and this is just that kind of conditioning.
Yeah.
They were put in an environment that was so difficult. It's hard for them to break away from that.
Yeah.
So they still struggle to think in abundance,
Yeah.
and that'll affect the way I see things in abundance.
No.
And that's very much a reality for a large part of India, because we haven't grown up in abundance for so long.
Yes.
But I think that sense can also come from the child, to say, how can I create a life of abundance for them that lets them be free, so we can collectively have a life of abundance together.
Yeah. Tough, not easy, but so much more. I think there is positive movement, yes, and hopefully there are more and more communities, more and more organizations, more and more people such as yourselves, creating greater and greater possibilities for people to find this freedom, this independence, to be able to make choices, some of which we made ourselves, and hopefully we will not become, we will not have to become the shade that we ran away from. Not end up controlling more people or more limiting more children. Sins of the father kind of a situation sometimes. So I try to keep reminding myself that the one thing I really hated was being told what I cannot do, and I sometimes catch myself doing the same thing. So holding ourselves very accountable to that. Thank you. It has been really nice.
Thank you.
I think we spoke for over an hour maybe, and there's still so much more to uncover, so much more depth that is in making choices.
There's always season 2.
There's always season 2. Thank you so much for making it, and thank you for listening.